Hello, everybody. I am Ian Williams, President of the Foreign Press Association in New York, and we're being fairly topical today, or post-topical, I should say. Um, we have Kristen Saloomey along, the New York correspondent for Al-Jazeera, who has been covering the Trump trial down in Lower Manhattan instead of covering the world, the United Nations, and other things. Um, so this has been a momentous and perplexing week for lots of people. It's been a challenge for many American reporters to try to explain the American legal system. You know, as anybody who's been caught up in the toils of the New York court system knows, it's an impenetrable system. It is not designed to be friendly. I almost felt sympathetic for the former president at the foils that are placed in front of anybody trying to defend themselves or even make sense of what's going on with the motions and counter motions from the various lawyers. It is very Dickensian. The one that springs to mind is in Charles Dickens. I think it's where the court case of Jarndyce v. Jarndyce about a will went on for over a century until all the money was exhausted by the lawyers as they argued about its disposition. So, well, you know, Trump has brought this stuff on himself quite often. But in the Foreign Press Association, we're very happy to have Kristen, who has been covering New York and the rest of the world for some time, very accomplished on it. So, Kristen, what was the big challenge here with the trial? How much did you have to explain to the, you know, how much did you feel you had to explain to the audience without, you know, taking egg sucking lessons for grandmas?
It is very challenging. The U.S. court system, you have federal court, you have local courts, you have state courts, you have appellate courts, you have civil courts. And while I assume other countries have different layers as well, the rules are different in every one. So as a journalist, you're constantly trying to navigate that system for sure. So there's the technical challenges of trying to get into the court, to have a presence in the courtroom so you can see firsthand what's happening. There's the challenges of a president who would speak often and attack the system, the judge, the witnesses, and you know, who's prone to bluster, to put it
Yeah.
kindly. You know, and all politicians have their slant and their propaganda, but he's a master of it. And so trying to fact check what he says and keep it in context is definitely a challenge. For example, if you look at the issue of him saying this is a hit job, this is a political prosecution, a corrupt judge. A lot of US media has pointed out that this is a district court, a state court. The judges are not appointed by the federal government, by the president. It's not directly related to the Justice Department. It's a state system. And many media outlets have taken to saying that. I would also point out, however, that judges are elected in New York. New York is overwhelmingly a Democratic state. And it is it can be very political to be appointed. So there's always a balance that you have to find and walk. And so I try to stick to the facts, give some voice to both sides, I guess, but also to fact check along the way. In terms of the challenges of being outside all day, for television reporters, we're expected to be live. often on the hour when it's an important day. So there again, you're dealing with uh, uh, getting information from a producer. And maybe we could talk about, if you want, Ian, the process of even just getting into the courtroom. For foreign journalists who maybe don't have a big support system in New York or in the United States even.
Well, did you,
with
in fact, that was one of my major points. Did you feel at any level resistance to a quote foreign unquote news agency going in? And once you're in there, Al Jazeera has a certain reputation. It's been banned from Israel. And New York is not just a city in America, it's also the biggest Jewish city in America. It might have decided that Al Jazeera was a terrorist organization and shouldn't be allowed in the courts. Did you get any feeling of this, that there was extra resistance, A, because you were foreign, and B, because you were Al Jazeera?
No, honestly, I didn't. We've worked with the courts. This was a little different because most of the court cases that I would cover that an international audience would be interested in are in federal court. It's not very often that we go to district court. So it was a learning curve for me and my team as well. But while I think they're more responsive to US media that they deal with on a daily basis, we were allowed, like any other media, to register for press releases, press updates. We were part of the jury pool where we would get, because only so many cameras and reporters were allowed in the hallway where Trump would speak, the one place where we could get him on camera going into the courtroom, they have a pool where with two journalists would send out transcripts of what he was saying. They'd start with the highlights off the cuff, and then they'd update it with a full transcript as they got it. So we were able to do that. We were able to get into the courtroom about 50% of the time that we tried to get in. So on those other times, thankfully for our audience, we don't have to discuss the minutia of the legal issues of the case and the testimony. We were speaking more broadly, updating about what witness was on the stand that day, what their relevance was to the case, because we frankly couldn't hear on some days the testimony minute by minute. To get into the court, you have to line up. So my producer would show up at 6 a.m. To get into the court at 9. And like we figure 50% of the time he got in and 50% of the time he didn't. It was just random on who showed up on the day. The major US outlets had people that they paid to wait in line overnight to get in, professional line sitters, if you will, so that they would be guaranteed a spot. We don't have those kind of resources or people, so it was a little more hit or miss, and we didn't cover every day of the trial, to be fair. Again, being international for our editors, they only wanted to dip in on the big day, excuse me, the big days with the big people. So, and members of the public, it's an open court in the United States. The public is supposed to be allowed to go in as well. So members of the public were lining up in the morning, and that turned into a little cottage industry where people would wait out all night and then sell their spot in line.
I was going to say, are those scalpers? This is the capital enterprise. There's an arbitrage opportunity there.
There were, and I encountered a lot of people who were in town from all over the country, just coming by to check it out. They wanted to see history. They wanted to see what was happening. People paying hundreds of dollars just to get.
I was to say, in terms of marketing, what was the ticket worth?
I want to say I heard $500, $600, but I don't quote me on it. I don't remember the exact number, but it was hundreds of dollars.
So on a par with a Broadway show, we had to get up early.
And speaking of a Broadway show, I mean, just the atmosphere outside of the court was a circus. You know, again, when there's big court cases, you get a big media presence outside the court. But I don't think I've ever seen one this big. The whole block in front of the district courthouse was barricaded off because of security reasons. So you've got this huge police presence because we've got a former president of the United States. The court is barricaded. Across the street is a park that's barricaded. There's a row set up along the sidewalk for media press pens. Basically, we're penned in these areas. And the big networks for the United States were there 24/7. They had people that would wait out with their gear, and it's basically first come, first serve, and you claim your spot. And once you have it, you don't want to let it go. So they would set up all their stuff. They pay security to stay there overnight. And then you'd get the occasional demonstrators that would come through, the Trump supporters who had hired, you know, those trucks that have the advertising video on them, going by with the faces of Judge Merchan, Judge Angoran in the civil trial. One day I was there and a U-Haul pulled up. Somebody opens the back door and all of these penis-shaped balloons were let out of the back that had the faces of the judges and the witnesses on them. So there was a lot of Trump supporters out there. There was also a movement called No One Is Above the Law, a group that came out a few times, and excuse me.
Yes, I have some
Also did, yeah, some counter protester, you know, who were out there as well. But let me take a drink because that gets to another challenge of reporting this. So the other thing that I noticed covering it on a daily basis, because especially for television, when you're doing your wrap of the day, you'll quote something that was said inside the courtroom. But what happens on a daily basis, Trump was brilliant at dominating the media around it. He spoke every day. He said almost exactly the same thing every day. There was nothing new, but you always had him there making his point, pounding home his point day after day. And in your effort to tell the story, put some sound and some color in it, it was very hard to balance the other side, I found, because he was the one who was always speaking out. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah, well,
obviously,
he's got something to say and he says it in a lively way. The others are lawyers and have to pick every word carefully. He does not pick his words.
Exactly. So, and while he made a big deal about the gag order and I can't talk, it's standard practice during a court case to not speak to the media, right? I mean, in high profile cases, it's not unusual for a specific gag order to be put out, because the idea is you're not supposed to try to influence the jury. And so that's very standard acceptable practice, that you're not expected to go around bad-mouthing witnesses or trying to, because it's seen as interference, right? So
it's always struck me as
that is difficult when he's constantly making that point.
It's a great American mythos that somehow you can sequestrate the jury from the pervasive media atmosphere. So around you, there's a 24-hour news system, which is full on Trump or about Trump or anti-Trump. And yet the jury is supposed not to notice any of this.
Yeah.
You know, it's a sort of pious myth. Everybody knows it's, in reality, it can't be there unless you lock them in a hotel room downtown Manhattan, which would be a cruel and unusual punishment. unless they get access to the to the
I mean, it's
minibar.
funny, right? And it's funny, they used to actually do that where they would put, sequester the jury. It doesn't seem to be a thing anymore. Nobody, I mean, if there was ever a time when perhaps it would be needed, this would have been the case. But, and I don't know if there's anybody who is listening and has any questions that we could respond to. I would certainly encourage them to ask.
Yes, please. Anyone with any questions to ask?
We were
You can either put them in writing, and we will, or you can indicate directly.
yeah. So the other smart, I say, savvy, I guess, move of the Trump campaign was having surrogates at the court on almost a daily basis, as certainly towards the end. You had people, politicians, showing up at the court, sitting directly behind the president in the courtroom, and standing behind him when he made his remarks to the press. That image, and the jurors saw that. They would see these congressmen and women coming to support him, standing outside. They'd had press conferences outside, which were also part of the circus. You had Matt Gaetz, the Florida congressman, standing outside, repeating the lines that this is a scam, this is a fraud.
Well, it looks like the jury took that the way you'd expect a New York jury to do. The fact that he had such rogues and vagabonds supporting him indicated he was guilty.
And they got, well, it's funny because as they were giving their press conference, there were other anti-Trump, but for lack of a better word, people out there that were shouting, "You're a pedophile, go back to Florida." So it really was this circus atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, this is the two-pronged. He's addressing the jury on the one hand, but he's also addressing his base, which is mostly in the South, of course, and in the flyover country.
Yeah.
So the Trump campaign had a dual strategy, and it's obviously got to dissipate it a bit.
I see someone asking about the perception outside of the.
Yes, okay, then go after it.
How was this trial perceived outside of the United States? I think this one was also hard outside the country and inside the country for people to wrap their head around because of the charging. The charges were falsifying business records, but it's related to the hush money trial. The hush money payment, that whole scandal is old news, right? Everybody had heard about that years ago. So the most salacious details and the sordid details of how Trump was living his life, his marriage, what he was doing to conceal his affairs in the run-up to the election. While that's all scandalous, it's sort of old news. So I don't think it got as much attention as it would have had the case come earlier, or that news hadn't been so known. Then you add to that falsifying business records, doesn't sound that serious. And then in order for it to be a felony, there has to be this other, illegality, if you will, that it had to be done to cover up another crime.
It's a bit like Al Capone and income tax evasion, isn't it?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it's getting him on a technicality for sure. Yeah, that's a good comparison. So they're getting him on a technicality.
He'd have been found guilty of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think I think, and then certainly for us with Al Jazeera, you had the Gaza situation, the war in the Middle East going on. And I think even domestically, I remember reading, I remember feeling that way, and wondering if it was just my perspective that the campus protests were overshadowing the trial. But, the campus protests became the lead story in the news many nights during the trial. And certainly for us at Al Jazeera, that was a bigger story, a much bigger story. But even the New York Times mentioned how that had uh, overshadowed a lot of the trial. Stormy Daniels, in particular, when she was being grilled and giving her testimony, the protests were in high gear and taking a lot of the thunder out of that, for better or for worse. I should also say that while the charges were were a bit difficult to explain, and a lot of experts, wondered aloud, like, is this a strong case? Is it going to work? I mean, the jury came back very, very quickly with this. So clearly they were convinced. Um, but then, but there are a number of legal issues that uh, will be tried on appeal. And I think there's a lot of, there is some skepticism in the legal community that I talked to about some of the moves that were made, and how that they will play out.
Well, prosecutors,
I heard both sides on that, but there's, it's like everything in the US, there's two distinct sides and opinions, but yeah.
well, obviously, from from the point of view of most of the world, and not just in the US, but everywhere else, it was almost a straight, how should we say, not an opinion poll, but a thumbs up or thumbs down to President Trump. But that's not what it was legally, of course. Uh, it's but now we have possibly a flaw if the prosecutor were politically inclined. We have a flaw there that 50% of Americans are saying, so what?
Yeah, I mean, the key are the undecided voters. This is such the polling suggests this is going to be a very close, tight election. Um, Trump has the advantage at the moment. Certainly he raised a record number of money. I think that first week after his verdict, it was like $140 million or something like that. I mean, insane amount of money from his base, who's fired up more than ever. The question is, will it sway law and order Republicans and independents who were maybe on the fence and don't like Biden? Is electing a felon. Certainly it's something you can legally do in this country. It doesn't stop him from running for president. But will the public actually want to, there's some indication of people who said that if he was convicted, it would make them rethink the, uh,
The
their,
voting intentions.
yeah.
But I mean, some people will vote regardless. They'll say, yes, he's a convicted felon, and yes, he lied and cheated like this. But part of the pervasive cynicism of modern life is that this is how people expect politicians to behave, isn't it?
Sadly, I think the you've got Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, guy that had gold bars in his closet. Oh, sorry, his wife's closet. His wife's closet. I think there's a lot of the one thing I get when I talk to people, and this is in New York, outside of New York, is just a lot of cynicism and frustration with the system and the two candidates. That's the best we have to offer. That's who the parties are putting up. So yeah, it's really hard to say. The bigger concern for me is what this does to the judicial system credibility, how this will play out. Will, Trump in the last couple of days said, oh, this could be a breaking point for my supporters. I don't know how they're going to respond if I have to go to jail. Um, it, the independent judiciary is, an important pillar of our society, right? So if people don't trust it, or attack it, or think it's politically corrupt, that's not good for anyone,
Well,
Democrat
we're
or
already tending that way. I mean, with the Supreme Court that basically jumps through any hoop that Trump and his acolytes hold up for them, and supreme appeal courts all across the country who seem to deliver contrafactual verdicts when it's what's convenient for the campaign. It's will this enhance or detract from the public perception of the judicial system?
Yeah, I talked to a legal expert, a friend. I asked her what her takeaways were from this, and is there something that the media could have done better? She talked about, uh, I mean, her big thing is she felt that the case should have been televised. New York State is one of the few that doesn't allow cameras in their court proceedings. And she said, for people not being able to dip in and dip out, or see for themselves, uh, she thought that would go a long way towards keeping trust. And when you see the detail and the process that the judge and the prosecution and the defense that they have to go through, that helps reinforce the independence of the court and the primacy of the law. I asked her, I mean, are you worried that, um, you know, this case could be overturned on appeal? There's question, does it do more harm than good, was my question. She didn't think so. But then I talked to another lawyer who thinks it's a travesty of the system, that there were a lot of violations of norms and the Constitution, in his view, in terms of uh, how the case was handled. So
What
it's
you mean against Trump?
yeah, I mean, yeah, that there there are a number of uh, issues for the appeal um, that could be heard. The way the jury was charged over, he had to be falsifying the business records in order to conceal another crime, but they never had to present what that other crime was. So it was kind of loosely described as uh, election fraud, or it was obvious. I mean, I think everybody believes that there was an effort to kill. I mean, the catch and kill, there were multiple witnesses to that catch and kill scheme that the campaign was trying to buy these negative news stories and bury them, but that's not illegal. So
If we put every politician on trial for their integrity, then the courts got the
right.
work cut out.
Right. So there's a lot of things that will be taken up by the appeals court, and how those decisions hold up. Obviously it kind of puts off, I think, the impact of the case.
But
And
Judge Merchant seems to have anticipated that and taken lots of steps to make it non-appealable. I think he'd sorted out the grounds for appeal in advance and tried to block them off. So it'd be interesting to see that how it works out in the latest system.
yeah,
That depends which judge, I suppose.
it could be. I mean, the appeals court, yeah, yeah. I mean, and will this go all the way to could it go to the Supreme Court?
Well,
Who knows?
if it goes to the Supreme Court, we may as well let Trump write his own verdict, mightn't we, at the moment?
Mm,
Oh, it's not quite that bad, but it's close.
mm,
It's close. I mean, it's that they have reversed 150 years of jurisprudence on the whim of a few obscure legal theorists so far.
mm.
And it makes
Someone
you wonder
else,
about the court system, trying to explain it to other people. How come a group of unelected people stacked with a very particular political direction? I mean, everyone accepts that the courts in Australia and Canada and Britain and other places have political appointees in, but it's not often they come parading in full colour and livery for one party or another. You know, you don't often hear that the Conservative Supreme Court judge in Britain or Australia or France, it's accepted that they have an independent judicial role,
mm,
and that seems to have gone out the window completely in the court in these proceedings. Like
with
Merchant
the,
was never the judge in New York; he was the Democratic judge.
yeah, yeah, you're talking about flying flags and support of on the Supreme Court. Um, although to be fair, Judge Merchan was also reprimanded, if you will, for making a political donation. Judges aren't supposed to do that.
But they're
Uh,
elected politically, and you know I've seen it. I know from my own entanglements with the court system that
yeah,
they're paid for by Democratic lawyers in New York, Republican lawyers in other places. That it's a far from perfect system.
right. I mean, but I think, like judges, often they're supposed to rule by the law and they have to justify their decisions. So, I mean, it's been a good system up till now, and let's hope it can hold up to this and maintain that. Mershon's pretty well respected in New York circles as a judge for sure. So, um,
Well, he's now bathed in the blood of the lamb after this one. So,
right. So we'll see. Somebody is asking, how
how
long?
long the reports were? Is that the one I was
Yeah.
about to come ask you about that one?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, mine, I hate to say it, but mine were pretty short. Again, Al Jazeera, we've been pretty, pretty, what's happening in the Middle East is our lead story on a daily basis. Um, not that we don't cover other news, obviously, but so my hits were I would do live updates during the day, maybe three or 4 minutes. Once in a while, if we could get a guest, a lawyer, somebody live, we might get a little bit more time. But it was challenging. I have to be honest. For my audience, I felt the need to kind of reiterate the trial. This is a trial, it's referred to as the hush money trial, but hush money payments aren't illegal. What he's being accused of here, was falsifying business records. And, we'd have that in the intro, of course, but it felt like I had to just repeat a lot of context. And that, when you're talking, that takes a minute and a half, and it doesn't really give you a lot of time to say, and then, okay, and then today we had Michael Cohen. He's the linchpin of this case, and he's the one who received the payments, but he's got his credibility issues because he's been convicted of lying on the stand in the past. So it's I feel like with the international audience, you have to give a little bit more background. So it can be challenging to make it dynamic and updated and cover any new ground. It's really, but at the same time, it's important because you're keeping, the world abreast in terms of a case that could affect the election of the next president, the most powerful person in the world, arguably. So,
So it's
yeah,
a real dilemma. You either have to sum it up in very succinctly, or you have to caricature the issues almost.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. How did the international audiences see? I think with that one we talked to, right? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
What are the takeaways for covering future Trump trials? I mean,
Mm.
what would you do are there any questions that you would have liked to have asked, but you didn't get round to, or any questions you would like to have raised about the procedure and the, the gist of the court case? What's it all about?
I would have liked to have been there. I would have liked to have heard the instructions to the jury, um, personally, on how they came to that conclusion, how the underlying crime that was being covered up and how that played out. I would have liked to have heard that firsthand to better understand how they got to that point. Um, but I think that the takeaways are, and for journalists, if there are any journalists who see this or listen to this, that haven't, that will be covering trials, and I would say, always, uh, stick to the facts, and uh, listen to media from both sides of the spectrum, because there's elements of truth in everything, and there's elements of propaganda in everything. Um, even, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but even mainstream media, I feel like you just have to be looking and listening everywhere, because we are a bit in a bubble. If you're in New York in particular, you're in that Democrat media bubble. And I think people are quick to dismiss concerns raised by the other side um, as part. I mean, not and not that they should take anything that Trump or anyone says at face value, but the people uh, who support them, to label them all as the crazy people that you see outside the court, because the ones that come outside the court tend to be the most extreme and crazy. But they're, obviously he is getting support from other places as well. So, yeah, just do your homework.
It's
Um,
like the old saying, even a stopped clock is right
exactly.
every 12 hours. So, it makes it difficult that, sometimes what Trump says is entirely true. And, that's one of the secrets of his success. He does hit the nail on the head sometimes.
Yeah.
And people remember that, but don't tend to remember all the other times.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
hammer blows around the nail that never got anywhere near.
Mhm.
And this it makes it very difficult in the partisan world of American politics. Having come from outside, and I've got no particular affection for the Democrats, so I've never considered to be angels in shining light. But even though I tend to agree with their agenda more than most,
Mhm.
uh, but it's still very difficult when you see the reflexive Democrat or Republican from people, especially in the current. When I first came to New York, I knew some Republican judges, and I knew Republican old aristocratic Republicans who were far to the left of modern Democrats.
Mm.
But it's a completely different world now. It is extreme. It's bipolar in every sense, both psychological and political.
It
And
really
every word has to be
is.
sifted and put in that context. But as a reporter, how much of our duty is it to provide a prism to guide this?
I keep going back to talking to real people. And I think when you need to talk to a legal expert in these cases. Um, so that's a little bit different with the um, covering a trial per se, as opposed to the campaign more broadly. Um, but I just, the news, especially for television, my world, um, the cycle is there's so much time to fill and things are moving so quickly. Let's do a lot of live shots. Let's just talk to this expert or that expert. But the normal voices of normal people get drowned out a lot. And I think, when you talk to Trump supporters about what resonates with his message, it's not always the same thing that you're hearing in the news, you know? Um, and it again, most of the media is located in New York and the big cities. So, you know, talking to rural voters, voters of color, you know, and where they're going and how they're feeling, it puts things in perspective more, and also shows more of the middle ground, I think, that you don't get when you have the experts.
It also shows the parochialness. I remember when Clinton was first elected, he had a huge campaign and he carefully kept it away from New York, Los Angeles, and Washington.
Hmm.
And the press didn't notice that this campaign was going on. They're so stuck in the metropolis that it went under their radar completely. So they were unaware of this huge media campaign for Clinton going on in the background.
Right.
And it's very much like that. I mean, the media are very, they contemplate their navels, and it makes you shudder to when you see some of the navels. But yes, it's and part, you know, the media bubble you're talking about is part of it. We're getting towards the end now. Has anybody got a final question? The killer question for Kristen? No.
Hmm.
What would you do differently?
Huh. What would I do differently?
Commit Harry in front of the court?
Hmm.
Protest?
Um, have more uh legal experts. I would do more live interviews uh with I mean, I just said less experts, but um but as the trial is going on, I think it's important to have a legal explanation of why things are happening and how it's being presented, and to fact check the process. That would have been helpful. I would have liked a little bit more of that. I was doing it behind the scenes and trying to, but to just have them explain it as opposed to me explain what they told me probably would have been more effective.
Okay, well, it's time to wrap up. Thanks, Kristen, and thanks for all those mornings, early morning sessions down at the federal courthouse. It's very drafty, that corner. I remember it well. Um,
Thanks for having me.
we have at least two coming up soon that you'll want to look on July the 10th, I believe, tentatively. We have Ali Velshi coming to talk about his career and upbringing, and who knew his uncle was with Gandhi in South Africa. Anyone who read his book would know this. But Ali Velshi has been a staunch, how should we say, illustrator of politics at every level. And as one of our colleagues who was actually shot in Minnesota during the Black Lives Matter, I think we have him down as honorary semi-martyr. It's not too Monty Python-esque. We're also planning to have something on the British election, not because I'm British, but because it looks like we're seeing the tail end of the British Empire. It's a bit like the Titanic. It's going down. The squabbling on the quarterdeck there with the various people. So we're hoping to have somebody to explain what the effect of all of this is on Scotland and the rest of the place, as we're in a similar position that an opposition that does not inspire and a government that actually leads to despair, leading to full cynicism about the results of the elections. So that's all coming up soon. And we hope to see you. Do join, get in touch, put your name down. And by the way, this stuff all costs money. Any of you know any stray philanthropist journalists who are looking at the end of their life with a big checkbook and a will, please get in touch with us quickly. We are trying to advance journalism, or advance might be a strong word at this, but at least to maintain journalism and keep it afloat in trying times. So thank you very much, Kristen. Thank you very much, everybody else. And we'll see you soon. See you at the appeal.
In the sentencing.
Bye.
Bye.